Introducing the Explore tab on YouTube Music. Find new releases, playlists, and more in one spot.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Conversations Cafe. I am your host, Carl Evans, Senior Director of Operations at Hope for the Day. It's a pleasure for you to join us this weekly episode as we continue our discussions on mental health through different intersections in our communities. And I'm super pumped for this episode. We've had some of the guests who are joining us tonight on in different episodes, but we thought it would be very timely to begin a more focused discussion. And if you look at this episode title, it was titled First Nations and Mental Health. And this is an important topic for a number of reasons, beyond just it's important to tell everybody's story, to tell different intersectional stories, of course. But when we were even putting together this episode, there's a lot of complications behind even the idea of what did we title this? First Nations, Indigenous people, might be problematic to say something like Native American because we're talking about millions upon millions of people representing scores and scores of different cultures who were here long before the word American was ever applied to this continent. And what I wanted to bring up with you is that when we're talking here tonight with our guests, this episode titled for First Nations and Indigenous peoples, we're going to be exploring individuals who are part of communities that for the past 2 centuries and beyond have been subject to brutalities, violence, programs of assimilation to effectively try to dissolve and disappear their cultural heritage, even make it illegal for them to share their stories, their aesthetics, their music, their languages. These are people who have gone through systemic forms of racism from government and institutional levels and social and cultural levels. These are people who have experienced a sort of displacement, both spiritually and culturally, and obviously, of course, geographically displacement from their roots. And that is part of a larger narrative about transgenerational trauma. But it would also be underserving and disrespectful to that in the face of these trials and tribulations, in the face of systemic racism, of oppression, of abuse and brutalities and injustices, just flat out injustices, visited upon this vastly diverse cultures from representing different unique backgrounds and histories from the whole geography of North America. And to be clear, when we talk about Indigenous peoples, there is Indigenous peoples who represent are present and live in more than 90 different countries around the world. And again, we're sort of focusing on the North American background right now. But in the face of these brutalities and this long ongoing process of traumatic experiences that's very much present and impacting in the day-to-day life right now as we exist, you're also talking about individuals who has persevered, peoples who have an incredible sense of resilience, people who have found ways to survive, to thrive, to overcome. And we're talking about peoples who have found ways in the face of these injustices to embrace a resilience. And, you know, even the act of embracing their culture and maintaining and keeping the vibrancy of their cultures together is a form of resistance, of, you know, it's an act of rebellion, even when you're talking about places where there were actual laws made to sort of oppress and repress their identities. And I think sometimes when we talk about, especially in the idea of First Nations and Indigenous people, there's too often the conversation is too much one-sided. And I thought it'd be important for us to have a conversation that acknowledges the truth of traumas and acknowledges the fact that these are people who have refused to relent and have refused to sort of dissolve and disappear and fade away, even when their stories have been denied, robbed, and silenced against them. And these are folks who it's very important that we bring these stories out and hold spaces in the public, even though they've been telling and celebrating their own stories amongst their own cultures and communities for ages and ages, and holding spaces for themselves. I think it's important that we also make sure to, in a sort of sense of allyship, encourage and celebrate these stories and this culture being celebrated out in the wide open and not just, carved away and put into certain compartments. So today's episode is focused on celebrating the stories and viewpoints and intersections. And we have a great guest panel with us today to talk about from their own perspectives and their understandings. And we're going to be talking about things like transgenerational trauma. We're going to be talking about resilience. We're going to be talking about just the celebration of their narratives. And I'm so honored for you to all join us. And we're basically just going to get rocking and rolling right away. So first, let me get our guests all visible, make sure we can hear everyone. Can we see you? Can we hear you? I'm going to start with Damon. Hopefully we can, Damon, can we see you?
Can you see me?
Yep, perfect. Thank you.
Mitake tokela ki wopila chichapelo. Yuha chante washte na pe chuza papelo. Damon leader charge machiab. Si chango ogalala lakota hemielo. My relatives, first and foremost, I'd like to give you thanks and express what an honor it is to be invited to this. I greet you with a heartfelt handshake. They call me Damon Leader Charge. Sichongo Ogalala Lakota. In terms of treaty terms, I come from the Rosebud Sioux tribe on my paternal side. The Louis Leader Charge Tioshpe from Parmley community of the Sichongo of the Rosebud. On my mother's side, I come from the Daniel Badwin Tioshpe of the community of Allen. I say that with great humility and respect. I used to only introduce myself as an enrolled member of the Rosebud Sioux tribe until my Ina, my mother, scolded me in a really good way because I also come from her teachings. So I have to pay homage and acknowledge her teachings and her side of my families. I'm the director of tribal outreach for the University of South Dakota. I also serve as the assistant program coordinator for the Native American Healthcare Scholars Program at the University of South Dakota Sanford School of Medicine. I'm an alum of University of South Dakota, second generation. My mother got her bachelor's degree there back in the mid-70s, so I'm again second generation. Prior to this position, I was the Director of Health Administration for the Rosebud Sioux Tribe, so know a lot about resilience, also not only from my professional standpoint, but personal. Prior to that, I did Indian education work. Prior to that, I did suicide prevention work. In terms of different grants that I've worked for, they were funded by DOJ, exposure to violence and the effects of. That was the Defending Childhood Initiative grant, which was then Attorney General Holder's legacy work. We were only 7 sites in the nation to get that grant, only one of two that were tribal. So I'm grateful to have gained my experience and expertise and have the ability to pivot wherever the doors open for me. I'd rather think it's the universe guiding me to the work that needs to be done in terms of our relatives, non-Native and Native alike. So again, it's an honor to be here. It's an honor to be asked. I just had my first son about 15 months ago, so my work's got even more real. I also have 3 daughters, and I'm blessed with a significant other, and then finally have my own family, and again to really take my aspirations to another level. Wopila, thank you.
Oh man, it's great to have you on. Thank you so much, Damon. And our next guest is Emma. Emma, can we make sure we see you and hear you? Emma, where we have you? I'm going to unmute you. We can see you, and can we hear you?
Can you hear me?
Emma, thanks for joining us. Please introduce yourself.
My name is Emma Eagleheart-White. I'm Oglala Lakota from the Pine Ridge Reservation. I'm very honored to be here as well. I grew up on the Pine Ridge Reservation, and currently I'm living in Wisconsin on the United Nation Reservation. I am currently a psychotherapist at Oneida Behavioral Health, working with a lot of Native people. I worked in a lot of different fields, youth advocacy, as a domestic violence advocate, worked in the court system, and now currently working as a psychotherapist, specializing in trauma, PTSD, sexual assault, domestic violence. Those are a lot of the areas that I work in. And my Lakota name is Wambli Wiakawi, which means eagle feather woman. So thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. Thank you so much, Emma. Our next guest is Shawn Imitates Dog. Shawn, can we see you? Can we hear you?
There you go. Can you hear me?
Oh yeah, loud and clear.
All right. Hello, my name is Shawn Imitates Dog. I'm Lakota from the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota. I grew up 5 houses from Emma. And my background, so I've been in Los Angeles for about 27 years. And in pretty much most of those 27 years, I've been in human resources, working in fitness, restaurant, hospitality, sports, entertainment companies, currently with Live Nation, based here in Los Angeles, been with them for 7 years. I'm the head of HR for them, overseeing their concerts division. In addition to that, as my profession, I do a lot of work within the Native community here in Los Angeles. I'm currently the secretary on the Los Angeles Native American Indian Commission, which, we do a lot of work with the natives here in Los Angeles that represent pretty much every tribe across the country, all coming here for a variety of reasons, whether it's through the relocation program in the 50s or just people coming out for college, or like myself, just looking for, a career. So doing a lot of work there, sat on several other Native boards here in Los Angeles. And then in addition to my work for my people, I also sit on a board for veterans in media and entertainment. That's another passion of mine that I have, which is working for another underrepresented group of people to help them find employment and build careers. So that is pretty much my full-time job, other than raising 4 of my nieces, which if you're a parent, that's a full-time job. And thank you guys for having me on.
Thank you so much for joining us. And our last guest, rounding out the panel, we've got Bill. Bill, can we see you? Can we hear you? Bill.
Are we good? Can you hear me?
Perfect.
All right.
Hi, Bill.
Yeah. My name's William Matthews. That's my real name. Bill's my stage name. Is actually an acronym for Believe in Loving Life. I'm part of the Yurok tribe up in Northern California, as well as the Tolowa Nation, which is also in Northern California. My father, Larry, works for the NCIDC, Northern California Indian Development Council, as the employment manager, and he helps, take grants from the government and use that to stimulate the job economy for the reservations all throughout California. And so, you know, I've been able to see that firsthand. You know, I make music, you know, try to inspire people and bring light to things that are kind of, you know, untouched on, you know, in the modern day music industry. You know, I'm blessed that my ancestors kept going and that, you know, they gave me this opportunity to be here with all of you guys and hopefully share some light onto some things that are in dark places and, you know, maybe help somebody out there that's going through something that, you know, I've been through similarly, or, you know, be an inspiration to somebody who's, you know, on a reservation somewhere where there's not as much hope as, you know, a lot of other places, you know, in the world. And so, you know, I'm just, it's a pleasure to be here with all of you, and hopefully we can all learn something from each other tonight.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. And that's actually is a side note for folks watching right now. Bill was cool enough to put together a little bit of a freestyle that we're going to be closing out the episode with. So stay tuned when we wrap up for that. But that's probably a good way to, you know, there's probably 1,000 different ways we could go in 1,000 different directions. But the fact is unfortunately that there's a lot of blind spots when it comes to these topics, to these experiences. It's not something that gets to be talked about in you know, in a sort of so-called mainstream way. And I think it would be important for us to especially for our audience, to sort of learn a little bit from your own voices. Let's talk about the reservation experience. You know, if any of you would feel sort of comfortable talking about, because look, especially for North Americans, for Americans, all you're going to get is a sort of textbook of, you know, the violence in the 1800s, and then people were put on reservations, and then they stop and they act like that was the beginning and end of it, and people aren't aware of what are conditions like on reservations currently. When we talk about mental health, you know, so let's just sort of give the shape of sort of mental health and that experience in the reservation life. I thought that might be a way to really touch on this, sort of kick off things. And you know, this is sort of an open panel thing. So basically, you know, maybe Damon, you talked about that a little bit earlier on. Did you want to sort of start off?
Sure. I think not only for you, but more for the viewers, listeners. Carl, do you know how many federally recognized tribes there are in the United States of America?
Not without Google, no.
For general awareness, not to make you feel bad or discouraged in any way, but your best guess if you don't know.
Best guess?
Yeah.
In the hundreds?
Take a guess.
Oh, about somewhere around, like, individually recognized tribes, I'd imagine it'd be something around the 150s.
There's 574, with about over 400 on the docket to be or attempt to become federally recognized. And it takes an act of Congress, a true act of Congress. So that just gives you some insight on how we're thrown into a melting pot and how unknown that really is. Sometimes we're forgotten, even sometimes unknown. And just because we're 1 to 2% of American does not mean we're not here anymore. So that's just giving you some awareness, education on that. And so there's a really great map that shows these reservations or these federally recognized tribes, which to me is really very related to your question about reservation life. But that's important to start there. I asked that question professionally and personally a lot, again, just to raise that awareness. Reservation life for me was beautiful in terms of Lakoi Choka, traditional way of life, and even those that followed a different way of life. It was a true sense of Tioshpae. Two of these members on this panel are my relatives. Hena Mitakuye, they're my relatives. On my great grandfather's side, who I mentioned earlier, Daniel Battle and Tioshpae. So we come from an era where it was true Tioshpae, and I tell this story a lot in terms of I could go into. I'm from a community of Parmelee, which sadly has a lot of sad and horrific stories coming out of it today. But when I was growing up, it was a beautiful place. I could go into any house and be fed, but I could also be disciplined. And nowadays that wouldn't take place because of the loss of teachings and the detriment of historical trauma, you know, the 71-year boarding school era, where it was policy was enacted to kill the Indian, save the man. That was real, and it's still alive today, and we're still attempting to recover and heal from that. Again, a 71-year period. So, you know, people say get over it, move on. It's easier said than done. Like, we've all lived that, and you know, we've been up and down. And my Tahashi Shawn had texted me earlier about not knowing much about mental health, and we live it. You know, from breaking that cycle to utilizing our culture as prevention. That's what it's really about. There was an attempt of cultural genocide to genocide upon Indigenous, Native Americans, whatever you want to call us. Like I said, I'm Sichango Ogalala Lakota, Hemielo. I know what I am, but there are political statuses that are placed upon us. Native American, Indigenous, First Nations. We know what we really are. It's just a matter of revitalizing our language, our songs, and our ceremonies. Another point that's important to make is it's just been 40 years since it's been legal for us to pray and live the way that our ancestors have lived through the American Indian Freedom of Religion Act. So for at least 100 years, a century, our language and our ceremonies and our songs had to go underground. So that's a huge part of that detrimental effect placed upon us, you know, where, you know, again, we're given a paragraph in the history books, and a lot of what we're going to talk about, history and treaties, culture, the attempt at genocide, those are semesters within universities, within higher education institutions. So again, I can go and go, as you can tell. I'd like to defer to my relatives on the panel, my relative Bill as well, just to get us kicked off, and really appreciate this time.
Thank you. That's very insightful. And you know, Emma, you had touched on this too, and I use the term transgenerational trauma, and there's intergenerational trauma. They could be interchangeable words. And for our audience, would you feel comfortable sort of walking through what is that concept? What does that mean as we continue talking?
A lot of the clients that I work with struggle with issues related to intergenerational trauma, and that can be the effects of alcoholism, drug abuse, domestic violence, sexual violence. There's just a whole gamut that goes along with that. And we also, with that, include historical trauma. So I always try to explain it to people in a way that just, you know, kind of like the analogy I give is, why is it okay to have in history books pictures of Chief Bigfoot frozen in the snow, and that's okay, you know, and you know, like Damon said, a lot of times, you know, the true history isn't even in the history books. The reality of what has happened, and a lot of the people I work with, they struggle with healing from all of that. And I notice for myself, I would have a feeling, you know, when I would see something like that. And I think what has helped me to heal, and I think a lot of the other people that I work with, is just knowing that with the knowledge of historical trauma, we're not only carrying intergenerational trauma, we're also carrying historical trauma, which one of the researchers, Native American researchers named Dr. Maria Yellow Horse Braveheart, coined the term historical trauma as trauma that transcends across generations. And because of that knowledge, I'm able to help a lot of people understand why the way they feel can seem so overwhelming. And you know, right along with that, with trauma is suicidal ideation. And for Native American country, those statistics are very high. Statistics for sexual violence is very high. 1 in 3, I think 1 in 4 for domestic violence. So I guess, I could go into my whole story if you want me to. But, I think with the identity, and Damon mentioned a little bit about that, I was fortunate to be raised on the reservation, and I was fortunate to be raised by my grandmother and my great grandmother. And, for myself, my intergenerational trauma, began at a young age. And, it really began with my mother being a policewoman for the Rosebud Sioux tribe, and bringing us home from her just getting off her shift on New Year's Eve in 1985. And she had picked us up, her children, me, my sister, and my brother, and was driving us home. And she was hit, our vehicle was hit by two drunk drivers racing. And things changed in an instant. She could no longer be a policewoman. She had a traumatic brain injury. She is a completely different person. And so, with that, having to heal from all of those issues, childhood abandonment, and then afterwards her addiction issues, and a lot of the, realities, the sad realities of things that happen on the reservation. And I think that for myself growing up, I really wanted to understand all of that, and I wanted to help other, children, other people that experienced the same thing I did and had struggled with it. On the reservation, there's a lack of resources. For a lot of appointments that Native American people have to go to, you go to see the doctor, you have to wait 3 hours. You go in and it's walk-in, so you're waiting 3 to 4 hours, just to see someone, and then another 2 to 3 hours for any medication. And it's the same for behavioral health. You having to wait that long to get help and get connected with someone. There's just so many limited resources. And I was also sexually assaulted when I was 17. So for me, I thought about not feeling safe enough to not having anyone that I could even share that with. I didn't even, share that with my own twin sister for I think it was probably 1-2 years before I ever told her about it, So for me, like Damon and Shawn said, we kind of lived that life, and we lived, those realities and that way of life. But it is, living and growing up that way is very, very beautiful. The culture, the tradition, the spirituality is so strong. And we have our ceremonies too. So when I talk to people about healing, I tell them, well, healing is not linear. It's not going to happen in one certain way. It can happen, from a whole variety of different ways. It could be going to a ceremony. It could be something as simple as journaling. It could be, just talking to a family member, but it could also be more intensive therapies, brain spotting therapy, somatic archaeology. And there's also a lot of wonderful healing programs out there too. White Bison has a lot of great healing programs out of Colorado Springs, Colorado. And there's also Freedom Lodge. They also have in Rapid City that also has a lot of healing programs too. So I think that's just, one small part of, intergenerational trauma, just from my viewpoint and having lived that way and wanting to help others the way that, to feel safe enough and to be able to trust someone enough to be able to heal and move forward in their life.
I can't thank you enough for sharing some of your lived experience. As a part of that, I think it's important for us and it's courageous for you to be able to talk about that openly. And with that, understanding that this historical trauma or intergenerational is might be an academic term, that part of it is when people use that term, this is living through the aftershocks, the ripple effects, the ongoing realities that experiences like having your culture be made illegal, the economic injustices that are tied to the creation of reservations, the social problems of having your identity robbed of you and tried to be suppressed from you. All these things can build up to create instabilities in understanding yourself and your own identity. And you touched on things like addiction and substance abuse, which can come from coping mechanisms of unaddressed and untreated trauma. And that makes me wonder a little bit about when we think of mental health, every culture has their own intersection in how they look at it. And stigma is so consistent, wherever you look on it. People hold on to certain beliefs about things that we don't say when it comes to our mental health. And I'm wondering, based on what you're sort of talking about, Emma and Damon, what you sort of shared with us already, from a reservation standpoint, from inside of that nucleus of that community space, is mental health something that's sort of taken, how is mental health viewed, I guess would be a good way of looking at it. Is it something that, we've seen some cultures, for instance, in the African-American community, mental health was always conflated as a sense of willpower, that whatever you've got going on in your minds, thoughts and feelings are based on, you control that. So like if you are having a problem that we now call trauma, or having a problem that might be clinical depression, you're just supposed to tough it out, boys don't cry, et cetera. And there's a very hard road to haul with converting, especially older individuals in the African-American community, to embrace that mental health is natural and organic and something that we need to talk about and get on board with. And I wonder, seeing how there are a lot of issues that are connected directly to mental health, how is that sort of like, what's the viewpoints on that? Because obviously, Emma, you're by profession connected to that, so I'm just wondering.
When I think about that, I think about boarding schools. That's one of the main ways, with loss of language, loss of culture. But something as simple as, nurturing, hugging, saying I love you, those type of things. And that's, across a lot of cultures too, that has happened. But I remember in my family, I knew everyone loved me and everything, but it wasn't something that was said. And it wasn't something that, people really acknowledged. There wasn't like a lot of hugging or anything like that. I think I remember the first time my grandmother had said, I love you. It was after one of my cousins had passed away unexpectedly. And she says, I love you now, but I know it's still very hard for her. And her going to boarding school. And my mom and my aunts also going to boarding schools. And I noticed the cycle continuing with my own children. And when I had my children, I realized I was like unconsciously following the same cycle where, it seemed like the child got to like a certain age point, like 4 or 5 years old. And then all of a sudden I was like stepping back and not being as nurturing or as loving. And then I thought about it, and like, that's the same age that they were taken away and sent off to boarding schools. Just something simple like that. And my sister and I also talk about being more nurturing with our children and having it have to be something that you really have to work on. And a lot of times people don't understand that unless they've lived that kind of life, and they're just kind of like, hug your child, but it's something you have to like consciously work on and work towards, just to be able to love your children, and express that. That's intergenerational trauma right there.
That's really insightful. Shawn, Bill,
Yeah,
how would you sort of describe sort of mental health growing up and current, sort of from a cultural perspective?
I'll go. So it's interesting because I mean, I grew up not too far from Emma, and then a town over from Damon, and one of the things that I always remember about my childhood, and I've talked about it to my aunts, Damon's mom's one of them, and trying to understand because there's 5 kids in my family, and it seems like we all went down a different path as adults, and so I always ask myself, I'm like, why do things turn out differently for me? Like, sometimes I feel guilty about it. And one of the things that I give credit to for, I guess, just who I am and who I become is sort of what, Damon touched on earlier is it's family, the Tioshbea, which is the larger family unit. And, my grandparents, I was raised by them, both full-blood. They were alcoholics, and like, it was bad to the point where I was taking care of them as a kid, while I'm dealing with my young siblings to get to school and stuff. And honestly, I kind of suppressed that for many, many years. I pretended that didn't happen because I kind of wanted to protect their image because I loved them so much. And my mom was, sort of in and out. And again, I never shared these stories because I felt like people were going to judge, and, a lot of people around me, the white people in that community didn't live like that. I felt like it was just the Native people. So I felt like I kind of had to hide that, and didn't start dealing with that until my adult years, going to therapy, and bringing that all out. But I think one of the things that, I do look back, when I first left the reservation at 18, I had ill feelings. I was upset. I was angry. I hated it. I never wanted to go back. And then as I started to go back more and more and spend time with family during family reunions and stuff, I got to see a better side of what I saw as I was leaving, because there's a lot of beauty to it when I lived there, going to spend holidays with, other relatives. We would all gather together and play bingo, like prize bingo. So there are a lot of really good stuff like that, or going out to my grandma's land with the cousins and riding horses, and, so there's a lot of good to it. And I really didn't know how poor we were and how bad things were until I moved off the reservation. Then that's when all that anger sort of started. And it took me a while to get over that. When I started to realize why these things happen to us kids, why my grandparents were alcoholics, why my mom left, like it's a cycle that needed to end. And, again, I feel like I'm in a better headspace now. And I feel bad for my nephews and nieces back there and their kids, because they're not going to have, I feel like, that loving, nurturing family that we had. I mean, we had 10 grandmas and 10 grandpas and 20 aunts and uncles. Like, everywhere you went, if you needed something, you had it. That was a really good, loving, caring environment, because when I went home, it was a different story. So that was a really good escape for me. And then, kind of going back to what Damon talked about, with resilience, I'm glad I had those experiences. I think it made, me who I am. And being on this call with 2 relatives who have done very well for themselves, to be able to still tell these stories. And it's our job now to break that cycle and teach our kids to be better. And it's tough. And I'm sure we'll talk about it here more, but it's tough balancing being, holding on to that life, at least for me, living in an urban area, holding on to that part of my history of my life, and then trying to find balance in this other world where people have no idea who we are, where we came from. I mean, working in corporate America, when people find out, oh, Imitates Dog, what is that? I'm like, oh, I'm Native. Oh, where? Like, do you live in teepees? Like, all the stereotypes still exist. So, like, having to reprogram these people to think differently about us. And again, that's a whole nother conversation, but that sort of has been my experience, is carrying a lot of that for many years, and then not really realizing what mental health meant. And I looked down on it at one point, and now I realize, it's not bad. I think we all have gone through it or still going through it, and it's good to know that and figure out how, it's good to know where it's coming from, because I think it's going to help you adjust yourself to be stronger going forward and not continue on with the negative side of it.
Thank you, Shawn. And Bill, how would you sort of connect mental health in your experience?
Well, first off, growing up, I always had the question like, who am I? I have my father with all my Native American heritage and the Native blood coming from him, and my grandmother, and the stories I heard about, my great grandmother, how her name became Willie Rubin, which is more of a boy's name, but it was the last name on the board in boarding school, and they would put up 20 names for 20 people, and it didn't matter what gender you were, you just got the name that was given to you. And so, there was a lot of things that I never understood, growing up. I was born in Northern California, close to reservations and all that. And then my mother moved me, to Southern California due to my father's, drug abuse and alcohol addiction. And she herself had alcoholism, until I was about 12 years old. And so, trying to understand, who you are as a person, and you look into these different cultures and these different things that are popular now, or whatever it may be, and you look for yourself in those things, and you never quite feel whole doing that, because the part that's missing is the connection to your ancestors, to your history, and understanding where we come from as a people. And it's all intertwined, being humans, and it's so unfortunate that when people bring up Indian, Native, whatever it may be, that the stigmas around it are completely flawed. Like if you say, oh, I'm Native, then they're like, oh, you have a problem with alcohol, or oh, you have this, or oh, you have that. And it's like, how do you automatically get to that? How is that automatically how you think? Why is that? You read history books, or you're taught things in school where you read it and you're like, that doesn't make sense. How is that the outcome when I see the people that are struggling on these reservations, who are given minimal opportunities, who are given minimal things to provide for themselves and their families, and they're almost forced into depending on the government, and forced into depending on someone to take care of them, when, the way that Native life was prior to that was hunting and gathering and providing for yourself and your family, and generational, you would have your aunts, your uncles, your grandma, your grandpa, all in the same place together. It wasn't all this separation amongst ourselves. And so, growing up, as a Native in Southern California, in more of a, in more of the city, coming from more of a rural standpoint, it was like, what exactly, what does all this mean to me? You know what I mean? And then when you would look into things to try to figure it out, you would realize that the actuality of the situation was completely contrary to what you were taught in school by somebody, speaking on behalf of Natives as a white person, or, what I mean? It was never, straight from the source, and my grandmother passed away when I was 3 months old. So I was never able to, receive that knowledge that they hand down. And my grandfather, he was, super ornery. And so he didn't really like to talk anyway. So it was kind of hard to tap in with him as it was. And so, my dad, he being as connected as he still is with the tribes, it's not easy for him. He's 74 years old, you know what I mean? And so the age gap between me and him is tremendous. So, communication has never been our top level of, what we're good at. And so, when I would want to know things, I would have to dig in myself and find things out. And so, the trauma that comes with it is as a Native, you kind of think, oh, I'm supposed to have an alcohol problem. I'm supposed to have a drug problem. I'm not supposed to have the opportunities that other people have. And, my mom moved me away from that type of astigmatism so that I would see that I could have what I want, have the opportunities, make my life what I want it to be, and, not be stuck in this hole of, this repetitive cycle of no hope, all these different things. And so, when people ask, about certain things and certain stuff, like my sister, when she had, to touch on some of the ceremonial stuff, when she had her child, Kikia, they sat in a hole for 3 days and we danced around them to bless them with Mother Earth, the whole tribe. And, like the brush dance and the stomp dance and the salmon festival and all these different things that I was able to, enjoy and experience really showed me that, it's a lot more about, being connected within versus connecting to the outside world. And, the government's done a good job of disconnecting us from one another and setting things in between us and allowing things to come in between. Like a lot of these tribal meetings will end up being arguments and fights over money and this and who has what and who doesn't. Whereas, typically, you would want to share amongst yourselves in your tribe and make sure that we're good. You know, if another rival tribe comes in, then that's a different story. But amongst ourselves, we should be united. And I felt like it's been, you know, a fight just to be together on situations. And, you know, things have been placed, like I said, in between us to allow that to be the way it is. And money being the you know, perpetrator and all of that, you know, creating greed and creating these things. And it's kind of funny because people, you know, to touch on, you know, what Emma said about, you know, the healthcare system, you know, everybody's like, oh, you're Native, you get free healthcare. I'm like, yeah, that's funny. Have you ever been to a Native hospital? Have you ever been to a Native dental care center? Have you ever experienced what you're telling me that I have? You know, oh, you're Native, you're rich, you got a casino. I'm like, that's hilarious. You know what I mean? Like, you have no concept of what we really are as a culture. You know, you think that we're just this or that, where it's like there's so much more to it. There's so many more athletic people and intelligent people and people who are dreamers and people who want to create and do better things. And like, you know, like all of us have tapped on, you know, it's always been suppressed. And so, you know, as a Native, I've always just wondered, you know, who am I? You know, and so to figure that out nowadays is even tougher, I feel like it is, you know, ever before. And so doing these kinds of panels and stuff is really awesome because it allows me to express, you know, the questions I have, and it allows for me to acquire knowledge from my family like this and hopefully soak up some things that I can take somewhere else and enlighten people and have that conversation that needs to be had, you know, to break that, you know, this is what a Native is. It's like, nah, man, we're a lot more than that. There's a lot more to us than just what you've been taught.
Thank you for putting that in there. And I think it's important for folks who are watching right now or engage this in days afterwards to pay attention. When we're talking about mental health, but you hear us, our guests talking about institutional things, economic things, you need to understand that mental health encompasses everything. But economic disenfranchisement, government and institutional systems that repress, oppress, or just try to control or build dependencies, these are directly deleterious to mental health. They shape and disrupt community structures. They shape and or disrupt support networks. You can't talk about an effective or embracing mental health environment or community without talking about the structures that people have to live under and in. And you can see the sort of displacement, whether you grew up and lived inside of a reservation or you grew up outside and are trying to reconnect. That's not an accident that there's this designed system. And, you know, Bill, thank you for saying that, a designed system to disrupt and disconnect individuals. And I kind of want to expand on that a little bit with everyone. You know, because mental health connectivity is such a critical part of creating a supportive mental health network. You know, not everything is, you know, there's no magic wand for mental health, but people feeling like they are not alone, for instance, can support and remediate a great number of challenges, because prevention starts with a conversation. And if you feel like you can turn to someone and talk, that's opening up a door and a road to maybe getting treatment that may not be there. I'd like for you to, so you're all from, so Shawn, Emma, and Damon, you talked about how you're kind of directly connected and you can talk in the sort of spiritual sense of being, well, and probably the lineal sense of being connected to Bill. What do you think, broadly speaking, or as best you can answer, what do we feel like the connection is among Native peoples? Like, you know, because there's been so much displacement, and I want to make this is a really like stupid or rudimentary question I'm asking, but I'm saying, like, you take someone who grew up in a tribe that's based in Rhode Island, someone who grew up, you know, in a community that was based in Northern California, someone who grew up in somewhere from Oklahoma. Do you think there's like an inherent connectivity, even though different traditions, different sorts of belief systems could be tied in? Do you think there's a innate sense of like, yeah, you know, or is it, do you think that the disconnection has been sown so deep that there can even be like a, you know, I don't know what you're about kind of a thing? Because that helps with our mental health if we feel like we can identify with other people's, but you see where I'm going with that?
I'll jump in first, at least from my perspective. So I think there is that connection. I mean, you know, when you're Lakota like myself, you go to, I live in LA and I'm in New York City, and you run into somebody and somehow you make that connection that you're both Native. Right away, like you get so excited, you're like, what tribe? And start breaking it down. Oh, no shit, you're from, you know, you're Lakota, where? Da, da, da. You start making those connections. And I feel like in Indian country, because it is so small, and when you travel around, I mean, almost anywhere I go in this country, and I'm not saying it because you guys are related to me, but if I even mention Eagleheart name or Damon's name, somebody, it doesn't matter where I am in the United States, knows one of those two, or the twin sister of Emma. Like, that's how I feel like tight knit our community is. And I think there is that instant connection and friendship. It's almost like we're brothers and sisters immediately, even though we've never met. I know I find that here in LA a lot, but when I travel, that's like just something naturally. If we see each other and we know, we gravitate to one another. And, you know, if we're the only two in a room of 2,000 people, we're instant friends.
Definitely, I have to agree with that. There is those inherent connections. And I think Bill spoke a little bit about it in terms of the similarities amongst the ceremonies. However, again, we're thrown in a melting pot, but we don't do here in the Great Plains area what they do in the Southwest. So with the similarities, there comes a lot of differences. But, you know, it's a small world, even smaller for Indian country. We use the word Indian as a treaty term. Again, we know what we are, where we come from. But there's a level of comfortability there. You know, if we're just only two in the 2,000, we're gonna find each other, we're gonna gravitate, and to us, that's gonna make us feel that much more comfortable. It's gonna make us feel that much more stronger, and it's definitely inherent. You know, it's something that you know, we gravitate towards.
And then there's like you know, Native people, we joke, we always joke. And so if it's a Lakota and a Navajo that ran into each other in New York, we're gonna give each other shit about each other's tribes and the nuances that we do. Like, that's a given. And that's like usually our instant connection too.
Yeah, humor is huge. It's a pejuta for us. It's a medicine, you know, in spite of all the injustices, the trauma, the battles, we find humor in some way, shape, or form.
And thank you for answering that. You know, it's one of the biggest obstacles to sort of, for people who are not directly connected, you know, or, you know, outsiders effectively, if you want to look at it that way, is a discomfort with, well, how do I even broach conversations? What's appropriate words? What's phrasing? What's, you know, what's offensive, not offensive? You know, just ignorance is so endemic and that's also an institutional thing. I think, let's just talk about the American experience of learning about, you know, Native Americans, right? And you're going to give like a very, well, I'm preaching to the choir, you already know, like a very sort of almost neo-insulting story, half-assed. And, you know, nowadays you might get more progressive-minded teachers who want to start the story from like Wounded Knee protests forward, you know, but I don't know if that necessarily captures all of the work and efforts that have been done by folks who are trying to sustain and grow and create thriving communities. So I wonder, we've talked about, just to put this right on the button, in sort of the reservation community systems, there are high rates of substance abuse and domestic abuse. And, you know, there was landmark studies about, in the boarding school system, abuse by, you know, Caucasian instructors and whatnot on students that's sort of went unprosecuted. And there's a lot of sort of injustices. And they're all sort of perpetuated by these systemic realities. But what is the sort of bright spot, or I guess what I'm saying is, if these are the problems and these are the issues, we always like to ask about sort of what does the better look like, you know? And in your personal viewpoint, if there are problems that exist right now, what are sort of things that give you sort of inspiration that our peoples are doing better or are getting better? Is that an accurate statement, or is it we're really sort of like, we're struggling right now, but here's what we could do to sort of get to a better. You see where I'm going with that? So I'm just wondering, would you describe from your perspective, do you think things are, we're struggling right now but we can get to a better place, or we're doing better and we're sort of like moving towards a better, and you can't make that assessment for every single group, the 500 plus, groups out there, but just sort of in your perspective, do you think the story as it exists right now is one in which there's struggle and you're kind of pushing back and getting to a better place, or there's struggle and, we need to do X, Y, and Z to get to a better place?
Oh, we're definitely coming. I think you have to contextualize each tribe and their treaties in terms of what their foundation is standing on. The Oceti-Sakowin, aka the Great Sioux Nation, we stand on the Treaty of Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868 or 1851 and the Treaty of 1868. And if you went from those treaties to where we're at now, we gave up millions and millions of acres of land. Not only land, but mineral rights, timber rights, and water rights. And so, in terms of those stereotypes, free education, free healthcare, free housing, those are treaties which were set forth in perpetuity, and it was for as long as the wind blows, the grass grows, and the water flows. But if you look across the boards in terms of our tribes here in the Great Plains area and a lot of other tribes who aren't gaming tribes or oil tribes or anything like that, we're inadequately funded across the boards. We're probably working on 50 cents on the dollar in terms of what was promised to us, in terms of what we prepaid for via the treaties. So you have to contextualize each tribe's treaties, and as the Oceti-Sakowin, we're the only nation to whip the U.S. We still have that flag, and it's underground. It's in pieces, and we stand on that loud and proud. But again, where we're at for a reason. We are poverty stricken, but we're rich in heritage and culture. It's a matter of revitalizing all of that. And in terms of the mental health, it's definitely interrelated to everything that we got going on in terms of addictions, violence, gang violence. It's all related. And you touched on it a little bit earlier in terms of the stigma. That was one of the main concerns, issues that we had at Rosebud when I was the health administrator, was the fact that we needed a mental health army because of what we're attempting to heal from. But it's a matter of when people come in, native, non-native alike. Granted, we're the most researched people in the world in terms of indigenous nations. We utilize our value system in terms of resilience, in terms of Wola Kota, Wachi Tanka, to really persevere. So people come in and they're like, wow, it's just a matter of revitalizing your culture. It's not that easy. Like you said, systems have been put in place for us not to have our culture, for not to be where we're at. So yeah, we're examples of that progression. And there's no one else that has a plight like us in terms of us being sovereign nation, sovereign people, having a government to government relationship with the United States government, in which we stand on loud and proud. It's a matter of them upholding their trust responsibilities and treaty obligations, which are usually always are not. To us, those treaties are all broken have been broken in terms of the way we're living and what was promised to us. So but we're progressing. We're in a really interesting era, from the era before us to where we're at now. We didn't have Native American doctors, whether it's medical doctors, Juris Doctorates, PhDs. We're writing our own history. We're doing our own research. So that sovereignty has grown to data sovereignty. We're owning it. Nobody's soliciting on our behalf. So we know what's happening with our goods. It's just a matter of building capacity. That's what I feel, because it's that whole argument, or it's that whole discussion in terms of, pull up your bootstraps and get to work. But some of our people don't even have straps. Some of our people don't even have boots. So it's a matter of you know, building capacity, building workforce, and you know, how do we become innovative in terms of our healing. You know, we have behavioral health departments within our Indian Health Service units, but you know, just walking in there, you know, there's that stigmatism that is placed upon you. You know, how do we become more innovative in terms of utilizing technology? We know now everybody communicates, you know, through text, through chats, and we're finding like, you know, some of the programs I've worked for, we're finding that, you know, if you can get them talking through some kind of communication like that, that's just as effective. You know, sadly with technology, there's not a lot of this going on in terms of communication face to face. But you know, there's a lot of work to be done, but there's a lot of hope. There's a lot of beams and beacons of hope out there.
I think I want to, oh, sorry, where you can go, Billy?
Go ahead, bro. Go ahead.
I'll make it really quick. You know, something too I want to throw out there, you know, because Damon was talking about, you know, our lands. The picture behind me is the Black Hills, which is what the government took from our people. And I don't know if you know, guys know this, but think is what Damon, 1980, the government, you know, we've been fighting with them to get this land back after they stripped it with Black Hills gold and timber and whatnot. But this is, you know, this is where we come from and our ancestors. And in 1980, the government awarded, I forget the exact number, but millions of dollars to our people to basically pay us off for this. And our people, as we may be struggling for, you know, a variety of reasons, we have a lot of pride and want to stand behind what our ancestors created for us. And that money was rejected, and it's still sitting in a bank account that is compounded since 1980 and worth a lot more money. And I hope it's in my lifetime. I'm sure Damon and Emma feel the same way, but I hope our people never give in and take that back, because I think that's what we all live for every day, knowing we never caved into the government for that green. And that's something I've always been proud of, and I like to share with people that don't know much about our history. And because the flip side to that is, when I get into arguments with people, is like, take that money, do something good, get treatment centers there, do all this stuff. And I'm like, no, you know, I think for me, like a lot of it, if you think back historical trauma, all that, there's the one thing that I'm always so proud of is our people has not caved in and taken that money. And I hope I go to my grave knowing generations behind me do the same thing. Just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, there's been a valuation put on the Black Hills, and just in terms of the gold that was stolen, in terms of I've heard 5 trillion, I heard 7 trillion. You know, one doesn't sell their heritage. You know, that's where our creation stories are born. That's our Jerusalem. That's our Mecca. It's not only sacred to us, but it's also sacred to the Kiowa, the Crow, the Arapaho, but to us in terms of our star knowledge, that it points out a lot of sacred sites for us. So, you know, the word has been put out since the great war leader, Crazy Horse, Tashunka Wiko, you know, don't ever sell your heritage. You know, my land is where my ancestors are buried. And, you know, that's a huge sacred site for us. And, you know.
That's it.
And, you know, there's a big movement over the last couple of years and recently in the courts in Oklahoma where, you know, at one point they were saying X part of the state was not, you know, part of the reservation. And then there was a recent court ruling where they're saying, well, that happened on tribal land. So they basically confirmed, okay, now this was tribal land is violation, you know, so there's a lot of that land back. You know, a lot of tribes are getting land back now through different court cases. California, something was just announced here in LA that a local tribe got, I think, a couple thousand land given back to them. That's happening more and more, which again gives me reason to believe. I'm glad we never accepted that payment from, you know, them stealing our land, because hopefully one day that could be part of a land back for our people.
Bill, what were you gonna say there?
No, I was just gonna mention, like, obviously what they're saying is, it's awesome. That's what we are. As a people, our culture, our heritage is worth more than any amount of money. There's nothing that you can give us that's gonna allow us to walk away from that. And as a people, we have to stand proud and stand tall in what we do and how we live, and stay true to our ancestors. You know what I mean? Because just for example, them taking that money, Crazy Horse would be rolling over in his grave, man, because that's what they fought for. We fight for these things, and it's up to us now to carry that on forward, and to be that light. Bob Marley said, when he was asked, you're a rich man, you got a lot of money, and he said, my richness is life. And that should be something each one of us as human beings, not just this panel, but anyone listening, anyone throughout the world should believe in, and that's why my name is Bill, is Believe in Loving Life. It's an acronym. It's something to show people that there is more than a monetary value. There's more than this and that. It's about who you are and where you came from, and valuing that, and wanting to culture that, and wanting to cherish that. And, I try not to get into the nitty gritty with people, because ignorance seems to be contagious these days. But, when it comes to people like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, we have our flags, half mast for her, but yet she's the one who authorized the pipelines to be dug on native land. She's the one who authorized all these terrible things for what? For money. For us? No, for them. For Shell, for petroleum, for these giant corporations, and so, yeah, what's 10, 20, 30 million to someone who makes $1 billion? That ain't nothing. Here you go. Shh, be quiet. Stop protesting. Stop fighting. Stop protecting what is yours. Because why? Because greed. They know every human has that sense of greed. But that's why, as Native, it is much more important for us to be warriors and to be the light and stand for what we believe in, and not give in to what this capitalistic world and these people who invaded our country. We have a day for a fucking guy, sorry, but we have a day for a guy who literally is Columbus Day, and it's for basically the slaughtering, of the Potomac and all these people on the East Coast, and all these Indians these natives that were just standing there to defend their land because they were living a peaceful life. We didn't need to be colonized. We didn't need to have these things happen, but they did. And it was against us. And then you have Thanksgiving, which I don't want to get too deep in that, but it's like, oh, it's a peaceful picnic. Like, come on, man. Don't try to pull the shade over our eyes, man. We ain't stupid. You know what I mean? Like, I as an owner of something, if this is mine and you come to take it, I'm not just going to be like, yeah, sure. You know what I mean? I've worked my whole life to build that. And for them to try to act like we're going to be ignorant enough to believe it, which unfortunately, that's why you start it at a young age, because then a child who isn't native, who isn't an Indian, who has no cultural experience, is going to believe only what you tell them until further research is done. And so that's why it's imperative, like Shawn was saying, he wants to go to his grave knowing that they didn't give up for that land. And that's the same way I feel about anything regarding Indian culture, heritage, history, anything. We need to stand by that, and my brother Ruben, he's now paralyzed and in a wheelchair. He had a stroke due to drug addiction and drug abuse and all that, but he was deep in our culture, and I would catch him weeping, sobbing sometimes from the number of people who were murdered, who were killed to take our land, and these things that happened. And I had no clue, you know what I mean? Like, I had an idea about what it was, because you be driving in Crescent City and weaving through the traffic, you got the redwood trees, you got these beautiful homes, and then all of a sudden, boom, that's reservation land. Oh, how do you know it? Look at the houses. You know what I mean? And that's crazy, just to know that oh, that's all reservation land. Well, how do you know? Look how terrible the house is. Look at all the broken down cars. Look at the tarps. Look at this. Look at that. You know what I mean? And that's what you grow up believing. So you're like, well, then I don't deserve that. I don't deserve this. Whereas, we need to cultivate a different belief for our people, because we're strong, we're proud, our heritage is deeper than that. And so it's awesome to hear, people I've never had the chance to talk to touch on that, because it shows me that my beliefs are in line with where they should be. And it encourages me to dig deeper and to know the facts and to stand up for my people and the people amongst the world that are forgotten and silenced, and, given these little bribes basically to shut up and go away and take your money.
Very well said. And it's amazing that again, as I was talking about making the connection between sort of these systematic realities that perpetuate conditions that create negative or adverse mental health realities. But it's amazing how a lot of these injustices are done for profiteering. And then the mea culpa, the apology, comes by way of a sort of like a cash payout afterwards, when, that seems to be an attempt at smoothing over or denying or pretending something didn't happen, is by using, and it's almost insulting the way that becomes an avenue. So I think at this point, I would like to know, because there's a lot of different things we could be touching on, and Damon, thank you for sharing about the idea behind treaties, for instance. And a lot of tribes were obviously robbed of their land, their rights, their domains through obscenely inauthentic and dishonest treaty systems, really, really shitty treaty systems. And getting better is finding sort of legal means to challenge and correct those things. Where we stand right now, as we're sort of winding down today, where we stand right now, I want to go back to something I sort of softly talked about before. So what do we think a better looks like? So here we talk about these displacements and the challenges that exist in the ongoing struggles that are out there. What do you think are sort of like the signs and symbols of an even better? What's full agency for your people look like, right? Sort of aside from the structural things, because Bill, I guess it's, when I'm thinking about that, Bill, you're talking about the economic correlation. So, sort of impoverished neighborhoods and things like that, right?
Right.
There's also low access to services, low access to healthcare, inefficient and deficient education systems. As we're sort of wrapping up, what are your sort of, when you think about where we are right now, for each of you, where we are right now, what are sort of like positive outcomes you hope to see, like in the coming years? Things that people who want to be supportive, and I'm talking about both inside of tribes. Like, there's somebody who is of Native descent is listening to you right now, and this is the first time they've ever been connected because they didn't grow up on a reservation and maybe they were adopted and had no real connection. What are ways that people can sort of think about, how can I help make a positive impact? What are things that we can be sort of striving for do you get what I'm saying? What are sort of like, what are things you envision are the positive outcomes we could be working towards?
Is that for anyone?
Yeah, that's a wide open question.
I'll go first. So, it's interesting because when the recent Black Lives Matter movement happened, back in May, I was talking to a friend of mine. She's mixed, Black and Latina, and we were talking about this, and she's like, why is your people not out there like being vocal with us? I feel like you guys are sort of behind the scenes or just non-existent. Thought about that, and this is sort of my take. I said, it's funny because I said, I remember as a kid growing up, and you protest like the American Indian movement, everything that they were fighting about seemed to be, at least in my perception or perspective, is a lot of it had to do with land. Like we're focused like the pipeline. Clean air, water, salmon, all this stuff. Like, it really goes back to that. We're not fighting about other stuff in the streets of LA or DC. I feel like it's always going back to something we all in this world need. That seems to be our, I hate to call it battle cry, but that's protecting Mother Earth. Like, it's that simple. All this other shit doesn't matter, because if we don't have that and it's not healthy, we're all screwed together. So let's start there. And I think that's what I've always been proud about and recognized about our people, is our fight is a bit different. We have all these other issues that we need to deal with, but I feel like we've always started there. That's like baseline. But what I will say is, I think that just hearing, Damon, everybody else talking about everything that we do, we have careers, but there's also stuff we do on the side. You got to think that team name in Washington, D.C. has changed this year. Everybody a year ago said that's never going to change, it's never going to happen. Guess what? It happened. More and more schools, and I know Emma can talk to this because she dealt with it in our own hometown, but we're getting rid of those racist mascots. It's happening. The shit is happening now. And a lot of, going back to Columbus Day, Los Angeles 3 years ago, our Native American Commission here, we fought, we had it removed. It is no longer a holiday in the city and county of Los Angeles. That movement's happening, and when that happens, I think it gives more pride to our people, because part of that is our own healing too. So I get excited knowing we are making an impact. Things are happening bit by bit, but I always go back to, I think the big and the most important fights is, it goes back to the basic, protecting our land, our earth.
I dig it. Okay. Emma?
I think for me, what brings me a lot of hope, excitement for the future is just, seeing my children and the things that they're doing. So I know that they're, carrying on and wanting to learn those things. My son is playing college lacrosse, and lacrosse is a traditional game of the United People. And lacrosse was revitalized in this area here. The Oneida people were relocated. They were part of the whole relocation, and they were relocated from New York to here. And so they had to bring back a lot of their culture. And I see that with a lot of young people just picking up the lacrosse stick and playing their traditional games. Even for my daughters, and I was able to bring them to the Women's March with my sister, and hearing the things that they talk about and the things that they care about for the future, and and the earth, caring about the earth. And I remind them, because they're young, and they don't always know, but I'm like, there were a lot of people who paved the way for you children to have what you have and to have those beliefs. There's a lot of people who suffered to make that path for you. And like Shawn said, growing up in our town, there was a lot of racism. We were just outside of a border town, and we went to a public school system, and there was a big chief, a medicine man, and 5 warrior princesses as a 59-year-old coronation ceremony. And we, like, when I see like people, like a lot of Native people and a lot of people everywhere, they're so ready to mobilize, to do things to fight for what they believe in. And I'm so happy that, the Washington, name was changed. And even now we were able to get the homecoming coronation ceremony in our hometown, Bennett County Warriors. We were able to end that, in 1997 or 98, we're able to end that. But what continued was the mascot name. And, I recently, received like a message from another tribal member who told me that they are now looking at changing the name, and just letting me know the work is continuing, So I felt, really happy about that. And when I see a lot of the young people, they're, being more open to, how do I find healing? What do I need to do? And just being, just asking, and being open to the different types of therapies that are out there. It's really an amazing thing to see.
Thank you. That's really good to know. Bill, what's your take on that?
Man, I think that it's most important that we have conversations like this. We can't be forgotten. There's a saying, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. They got, Black Lives Matter, protests. You got, you know, all these different protests about ICE. You have all these different protests, you know, about the pipelines, you know, and it's just most important to stay current, you know, stay in it, stay in the moment, you know, and continue to make a movement that's, you know, backed by good things. And you know, culturally, you know, we need to stay alive. You know, we need to continue to show, you know, that we're out here. You know what I mean? And that's why me doing this, you know, panel was a really great opportunity, you know, not just for myself, but for everyone, you know, here and out there to know, like, oh, yeah, this guy makes music, but you know damn well, like, I'm repping the natives, man. Like I'm making sure people know that we're out here. We're not just at the reservation. We're not, you know, just here, there. You know what I mean? We're doing things, you know. And you know, like Emma said about her son playing lacrosse, you know, there was people before him that paved his way, and the same it goes for me, you know, with music and everything. But you know, I want to bring pride to my people and to all the peoples of the sovereign nations across these, you know, United States and South America and up in Canada and up in Alaska and everywhere. You know, any tribe, you know, any person who is part of a tribal community can have some type of, you know, just like, yeah, that's my boy, or like, yeah, they're doing something better that gives them hope. You know what I mean? And hope for the day is an amazing thing, you know, in itself. And so for it to extend itself to, you know, the natives and the indigenous peoples, or, you know, whatever you want to be politically correct, I feel as though, you know, politically correct is talking about it. You know what I mean? If ain't nobody talking about it, it's forgotten. You know what I mean? And so for all of us to get together and get together on a purpose of, you know, exposing things, you know, and telling people like it's okay. I mean, look at Dak Prescott. You know what I mean? He came out, you know, said this and that, and it's like Skip Bayless and this guy and that guy. You're not a leader. You're basically calling him a pussy. You know what I mean, for that? And it's like, man, you know what I mean? This man just lost his brother to suicide. You know what I mean? And now he's having those same thoughts, and it's like just that type of stigma is just a glimpse into what, you know, you're seeing that with the professional athlete. So imagine what a 13-year-old, a 14-year-old, a 15-year-old is going through. 16, it doesn't matter what the age may be, but just imagine the difference. You know what I mean? You have someone famous looking for a helping hand and doesn't get it, but yet you have somebody who's really on that same thing, and there's nobody there. So it's like, you know, just be there, be aware. You know, the people you have around you, make sure that they know that you love them. You know, like Emma was saying, it was hard for her grandmother to say that, you know, and for me, that's the easiest thing for me to say. Like in one of my songs in the intro, it's like, love is free to be given, so give it, because that's it. Love is free. Love comes from a place of giving. You know what I mean? And if you can provide that for somebody, there's nothing more that they can take from you. Once you've given them your love, there's nothing they can take. You know, and so you're giving them a part of your spirit, your soul, and all those things that encompass who you are. And so I think it's just important for all of us to be together and to continue having these conversations, continue bringing light to things that are truthful, and not ignoring, you know, the reality of what it is.
Thank you for dropping that there. And I think that's a good way to sort of, you know, as we're sort of bringing this to a close for today, because as I said before, take small bites of a very large conversation. I think it'd be useful for us as we're winding down today, and not everyone may be able to answer this, but support, right? So we don't, you know, no group is an island. What do you think? Because if we want to bring everyone into a conversation, we want people to hold space and listen to your conversations. I'm always interested to know, what do you think, what might be a little insight you could share with someone who wants to be an ally, someone who wants to be sensitive and supportive? What is maybe a small baby step for someone to be an ally? You certainly don't want to have to be the cultural tour guide for every single person who asks you, right? But I mean, especially for all of you talking about how there's this weird discomfort people have when you identify yourself and then they're asking if you live in a teepee or something, you know.
Yeah.
But what might be at least a small way of somebody becoming a good ally, you know, to the cause and to the peoples? Start with Damon.
I would encourage coming from the perspective of solidarity rather than allyship, because you're coming together as a whole, and you're not coming from a different level, or it's not in a form of charity. Because I think that's where we all come from in terms of our ancestors. We were a tribe, we were disciplined, we had teachings and traditions, everybody had a role, but we had societies that kept us in order. But evidently, obviously, a lot of that has been broken down. It's critical. We're in critical times, but it's still encouraging. Granted, it's a pandemic, racial inequalities, the elections coming up, but it's still encouraging times. I have to take that hope and that resilience, that wachi tanka from my ancestors, just like Tatanka Yotaka had said. Sitting Bull, another great leader amongst us, is let us put our minds together and see what life we can make for our children, which is a very loose interpretation of what he really said. And that was a time of him and Crazy Horse being the last holdouts for our way of life and for being stewards of Unchimaka, of the grandmother earth. So we have to move forward in those ways and share our wisdoms, share how we can continue to be in solidarity. So that's what I would implore, and there. I can't say enough for education for me, but I know everybody can't attain those goals. We have to be more innovative in terms of, again, building capacity. But, for any ethnicity, especially us, education has become a social equalizer. My brother says it a lot. If you're, what does he say? If you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And I remember Lekshi Bill Means, who was the brother to Russell Means of the American Indian movement, was get your bachelor's, that get your foot in the door. And now everybody's got a master's. The master's is the new bachelor's. So, it's important. It's even more critical for us here in South Dakota. Again, I have to cite Lekshi Bill Means of he dubbed this the last frontier state. It's still cowboys and Indians here, for better or worse, more for worse. And my relatives have talked some about that. But again, it's encouraging. I work at the med school, and I have students that, their era is, we plant the seeds, they're going to make the change because they have information at their fingertips. And once they find out this and that happened, they're wondering how they can make that change. So again, I would implore coming from the perspective of solidarity rather than allyship, because again, it seems more as charity. So I thank you for this time.
Great. That's awesome. And so Emma, for best solidarity.
I really liked what Damon had said about education. I think education is key. Just kind of putting yourself in someone else's shoes and understanding the path that they walk. Even, trying to understand the culture, because the culture is so important to Native American people. And for like a lot of Native people, they're fighting really hard to just hold on to their culture, and just having that basic understanding of it, because there's a lot that goes into it. But if you try to put yourself in someone else's shoes, you can understand the point of view that they're coming from, because it is really hard to have that trust in other people that they are going to help you, and that comes from a place of historical trauma. That trust is historically hasn't been something that has been easy for Native American people, and even now that is what prevents a lot of people from healing. It's just having that trust. So trying to understand all the atrocities Native people have been through, and just walking with them on that path.
Super. Thank you very much, Emma. Shawn?
I mean, it's almost similar to what they said. I was thinking as they were talking back to my childhood when, people would come and treat us like a charity case. And like Damon mentioned, a lot of times when people want to do work for Native communities, they tend to think of Pine Ridge first, like that's where everybody goes. And one of the things that I remember as a kid when people would come to help is they would come do like a big production and get you enticed and excited as a kid, at least from my perspective as a kid, and then they disappear and you get your hopes up that there could be some help or that connection there, and then they disappear and you felt left out, let down over and over. So, I've actually worked with a couple of organizations that wanted to do work with my reservation or have done and wanted to pull me in because of my connection and my work. And I'm very careful on how I do that because I want to do it right, and not do what people had done to me, at least, when I was a kid. I was talking to Hope for the Day about this when we started doing the work that we're doing. And I said, it'd be so amazing to have you partner with someone back home that does traditional healing and partner with Hope for the Day and what they do, because I think it's a unique approach to addressing mental health and doing something for the youth, because I think the youth can relate to Hope for the Day. And we have high suicide rate back home. So it would be good to have, but it has to be done right. It can't be forced. And I think you need people within the community to help sort of build that relationship. But it has to be meaningful and it has to last. It can't be I'm coming in, doing it once and leaving. Like, what is your follow-up? These people, especially the youth, they need to build that trust with you and believe in you.
Thank you. And Bill.
Yeah, man. The people that had the biggest influence on my life were the ones that were the most consistent. So, like Shawn said, people might pop in, oh yeah, rah, this and that, and then it just creates a perpetual cycle again. A guy, he comes in, creates hope, lets him down. Comes in, creates hope, lets him down. So, if your intent is to make a change, then be that change. Don't talk about it. Don't just, ride in with a bunch of trucks and give kids meals for one day and then you bounce. Make it a weekly thing, make it a monthly thing, make it something that is consistent, that they can hang on to, that they can look forward to, that they can, like in this freestyle that we're about to play, it's like, hope for the day just to get through the night. Give those kids that hope they need, give those people that hope they need to get them to that next moment. And then when they need that replenishment, they need that refuel, you're there, or somebody else is there you've taught, because like they all have touched on, it's cultural, we have to be together on this, and it's like it all gets passed down from generation to generation. And, when I was sponsored by Nike for athletics and stuff, there's this program called N7, which is what you do today affects the next 7 generations. And so if people had that in mind, when they did things, they might second guess themselves about some of the choices they make, because it's going to influence not just yourself, but those next people to follow in your footsteps. And so as long as we all keep that in the forefront of our mind and the forefront of our actions, I feel like true change can come of that. But when you go, yeah, I'm just tired, or yeah, just not today, or yeah, just not that's a regression. That's taking a step back. And we have to continue to move forward with one another while bringing people with us and while creating that path that other people behind us can follow along with, and they can understand where they come from and who they come from and the culture that they're associated with. So, like I said, it's about being consistent and it's about being there, and being present. So.
And I think that's a good way to put a button in it for tonight. And what I want to draw home as we're sort of winding down tonight is that Conversations Cafe can never really, we take on small bites, and I think we touched on a lot of good pieces of information that if you're checking our chat threads, we've put a number of the resources and information, things that Emma shared, for instance, we have listed, so you'll always be able to reference those things. But if you've never really considered these conversations before, and this is the first time you've sort of studied them, it's important to understand that the most powerful thing we can be doing as communities is, in fact, to have these conversations. When we talk about mental health isn't just about getting a clinical diagnosis or a prescription or even treatment. It's also about talking about the conditions and realities that we face on a day-to-day basis, because not everything is about a genetic basis for mental health. Oftentimes, and unfortunately, very consistently, a lot of people are going to have mental health crisis that are entirely related to external factors, to things that were traumatizing, things that were visited upon them. And I want you to sort of recognize that in the conversations around First Nations, around Natives, around people who are Indigenous to this land, that story is not just one linear model. It's a complex and diverse sort of quilting of different experiences that share, or at least unified, in that they experience different systemic injustices, but finding a better and persevering through has come through a lot of different avenues. And there's still lots of room and lots of ways to grow and get better that are out there. But one of the things that we know is very consistent about people who experience mental challenges and people who have a cultural connection to systemic injustice is that if we don't hold space, if we don't create opportunities to share and raise the visibility of their realities, then oftentimes it becomes very easy for situations to be left in the darkness, to be set on the sideline, to let injustices continue. And I want to thank all of our guests tonight for being individuals who want to bring their stories and their people's stories out into the public light. No one has to speak for every one of their peoples, but telling your stories is a way of sharing the stories of so many others, because your truths are consistent with the human experience. And too often and for too long a time, your stories, quite frankly, have been told by other people and have been misrepresented and sometimes just entirely silenced. So I cannot thank our guests enough for being willing to share their insights and talk to their truth, because it's just something that we need to do more of and have more out there. Conversations Cafe is an opportunity for us to do that, and we hope to have you all on again, have other individuals on representing other tribes, other experiences, and other intersections on mental health. Shawn Imitates Dog, Emma Eagleheart-White, Bill, Damon, Leader Charge, thank you so much for being phenomenal guests, sharing and disclosing and being open and frank with us. Conversations Cafe cannot exist without our amazing production team, Rick Osowski, Mike Vinopol, Vicky Cisnet, and the whole Hope of the Day community as well. And I can't thank you, the viewers and listeners, if you're checking this out on the podcast, enough for joining us for another one of our episodes. And we're going to be closing out this episode with a freestyle Bill produced earlier today that I thought would be a great, nice little touch, because in closing, one of the most powerful tools we have as a peoples is our self-expression. It's the way we communicate our hurt, our pain, our joy. And if you've been paying attention to the discussions tonight, self-expression is a thing that was weaponized against First Nations people and Indigenous people. Taking away your music, your songs, your stories, your traditions was used as a weapon because it's so critical and so powerful to celebrating and recognizing and connecting your communities. So I thought it'd be fitting to celebrate another form of self-expression as a way to close out this episode. So again, I want to thank all of our guests. I want to thank you, our audience, for listening, and I hope everyone has a wonderful evening. And Bill, do you have I don't know if you've got a title for this freestyle.
No, it was just a freestyle for everybody, just something to enjoy, just something off the top and just kind of open-hearted and let it run.
All right, great. Well, thank you, everyone, and please stay tuned.
It's your boy Billy, man. Let's get it. Believe in love and life. Yeah. I don't have no time for the faking, and I ain't got no time to be complacent. You know what I'm chasing. I'm busy pushing on the gas cause I'm steady racing. Just trying to erase it. My past, there was mistakes. Damn, sometimes I'm thinking I just really hate it. Man, I just wanna be the greatest. I'ma tell you, man, like that boy that wore the jersey for the Lakers, or the one that was in Chicago. Yeah, the one that shoot they shot. Yeah, they ballin' on all y'all. But hold up, man, I got a problem to solve. If it's the one that I was chasing at the bottom of a bottle, dog. Yeah, I used to smoke it up. You know my indigenous people, yeah, they all stuck. They on the reservation seeking all that happiness, but all they got is bottles to grab and shit. I don't know what about it. I ain't here to just brag and shit. I'm just here cause I'm just doing this rapping thing. Trying to tell you now this is so strange, but you forgot about this culture, man. And you be talking about Columbus Day. Well, I'ma tell you right now, fuck Columbus Day. Yeah, and Thanksgiving was faking. Yeah, they took all my land cause all the shit that you be living on is taken. Yeah, but I ain't worried about it cause I'ma press the brakes. Yeah, I'm just gonna make sure my crew been tight and ain't nobody got no faking. Yeah, I tell you right now, we don't need no reparation. We just need some separation from this bottle and this liquor and these problems that we doing. Everybody, they be sipping, pop a pill, and yeah, you know that they just numbing to the ending. And I'ma tell you right now, I'm doing it to the end and ain't no pretending the way that I do it been the realest. Yeah, you know that Billy been on the beat just to kill it, huh? Yeah, they trying to slow me down and put me back up on the reservation. I'ma tell you right now, unless you hit me up to book me, you should miss me with that. Cause I'ma tell you right now that I be spitting straight facts. There's no cap unless it's just a cap with Bill on that. You know that Billy been the one to come and get it. I snap, hold up, you gotta beat, I don't want the shit back. But I'ma tell you right now, yeah, they know what I had. My brother in a wheelchair from the problems he had. Talking about the drugs and bottles, yeah, the shit that he had. Oh, I don't want none of that. I gave it all up, I don't want it back. Yeah, freestyle that. You know the only thing I'm spitting is facts on tracks. Cause I'ma tell you right now, I'm blowing up like that. Yeah, you know about this and it's the realest you had. You know I've been the one, I grew up and I ain't had no dad, but my dad was there to try to make it feel like I had somebody. But you know my mom was the one that was telling me that I could make it. Yeah, but I'm just doing this to the end and I got my manager with me. You know that he been telling, but this is a story about healing. Ain't something about that boy Billy, he ain't giving up and I ain't giving in to. And you can't give in to, you gotta press through and don't give up. Cause there's some people around you that love you. Feel, man. Let's get it. I can feel the pressure building now, but I ain't never gonna give in. I gotta keep on going. Yeah, I'm marching to the end, but you know that I'm knowing. Hope for the day just to get through the night. I'ma tell you now that I'm living right, but I didn't used to. You know what I was used to. Using, abusing, you know the drugs that I would do. Driving me crazy, they think they going insane. But I'ma tell you right now, don't give up, man. Just keep on going, you know that the fight got you. Cause you gotta call your family to help you up in this proper to keep it going. And yeah, the words that I'm dropping, I'ma tell you now, man, this is straight knowledge. Yeah, and I ain't finished college, but I tell you now, man, my life's got mileage. Going and going, you know I'm never giving up. Yeah, hoping and hoping, you know that ain't enough. I gotta get up, I gotta do it myself. You know that I ain't come from wealth, but I'ma do it till I go to heaven and hell. You know what I'ma tell him now? Yeah, that boy really well, he really been going on. And I'ma tell you that I used to have a problem, but I had to drop it, man. I had to kick back the monsters. Yeah, you know I conquered my demons. You know that I've been dreaming. You know that Billy been dreaming. You know I got me a team and I gotta go and get it. I'm telling right now, I'ma stand tall all until the finish. I'ma pass it rock. You know I gotta shoot my shot. Yeah, what they doing, they just sitting back and all they do is talk. Yeah, well Billy gotta go and get it. I'm sparking and I gotta do it. You know I'm lighting fires to the finish. Yeah, you know they really with this. Hope for the day just to get through the night. Hope that it does something. Yeah, man, I'm praying. Yeah, I know about it, man. I ain't asking for favors. I'm just telling you to stop being the one that been hated. You don't know the problems that they going through. You can't debate them cause the battles they fighting, they might be invisible. But I'ma tell you right now, this ain't what we gonna do, yeah.